John Paul J.P. Miller was back in court this week to enter a plea to the federal criminal charges he faces. Charges that could send him to prison for a long time. And we learned more about the investigation, what was apparently found in his house, if there will be more charges, and what happens next in this case, including will he be released pre-trial. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, if you're into content creation, if you're putting things out on social media, have you ever wondered how we're able to share so many of these clips from these stories so quickly? We use something called Opus Clip. This is an all-in-one AI editor that makes it so easy to cut, create, and upload videos across any platform. Through AI, Opus Clip generates B-roll, it reframes footage, and it even cleans up audio. It is so easy. You just visit opus.pro/sidebar, you sign up, you upload, and in minutes, you will have perfectly edited clips ready to go. For TikTok, Shorts, Reels, Opus Clip is your one-stop shop. And having a tool like Opus Clip means that our producers can get you viral courtroom updates instantly. This is the most powerful tool there is to share ideas and edit like a pro. So go to opus.pro/sidebar to get a free week and then 50% off. All right, let's talk about John Paul J.P. Miller. He's back in the news, and this time he has officially entered a plea to the federal charges that he faces. And by the way, there are a slew of other legal developments in this case that we're going to talk about as well. But remember who we're talking about here, this South Carolina pastor who nearly 2 years after the unexpected death of his wife, Micah Miller, which captured headlines, he was indicted on cyberstalking and false statement charges. These are federal charges. You read from the indictment, it essentially alleges that for a period from November 16th, 2022 through April 27th, 2024, that is when Micah died by her own hand out in North Carolina, he allegedly sent harassing messages to victim one, so presumably Micah, posted a nude photo of her online, placed tracking devices on her car, surveilled her, damaged her car, interfered with her financial affairs and her daily life, all with the intent to kill, injure, harass, or intimidate. That's the first charge. Then, the indictment alleges that on October 17, 2024, Miller allegedly lied to federal investigators about how much he had been calling victim one, that he was never told by police to not contact her, and about not damaging her car. By the way, it was reported that Miller told authorities that he hired a private investigator, a PI, to watch out for Micah, to make sure that she didn't buy a gun because maybe he was worried about her safety. Prosecutors allege, no, that he actually hired a PI to see if Micah was cheating on him. I think the best way to summarize the allegations, you have U.S. Attorney Brian Sterling, who said, quote, the indictment describes some disturbing allegations of harassment. While marriage should be a place of peace and support, it turned into a nightmare for Micah. Kevin Moore, the agent in charge of the FBI's Columbia Field Office, called Miller's alleged actions predatory. And that all brings us to the big update, what we're talking about right now. Because for the man who is now facing reportedly up to 5 years in prison for cyberstalking and 2 years for making false statements, John Paul Miller has now officially entered a plea of not guilty to the charges. He was just in federal court on Monday for his arraignment out in Florence in South Carolina, where he entered his official plea to the charges. That is not all the developments, though. He also waived his right to a speedy trial. So under federal law, a trial has to begin within 70 days from when the indictment was filed, but a defendant can waive that. That is what happened here. You have the waiver right here. It says, my attorney has informed me of my rights under the Speedy Trial Act. I wish to waive my rights under that law and have my case continued past the upcoming term of court. I make this waiver with a full understanding of my rights to have this matter heard according to the requirements of the Speedy Trial Act. This waiver is made voluntarily. No one has forced, threatened, or enticed me to sign this waiver. I make this waiver of my own free will and accord. Why did he do that? We're going to discuss. Also, bond. Okay, so he was released on a $100,000 unsecured bond. So he's out. Now, there's certain conditions, like he can't violate the law. He has to provide a DNA sample if it's asked of him. He can't possess a weapon. He has to either get a job or maintain a job, surrender his passport, can't leave South Carolina, has to wear an ankle monitor, not contact any witness in the case. That last part really significant in that he is accused of sending intimidating texts to a witness who was apparently working with the FBI. And what's interesting about that is you have Assistant Prosecutor L. Klein, who who warned the court that the FBI searched Miller's home. And apparently they found this large safe containing cash and silver and baseball cards, among other items, that he had access to a private plane. So their argument was, this guy's a flight risk. He needs an ankle monitor. Client saying the victim's family would feel safer with the location monitor. Now, Miller's attorney, Nathan Williams, argued, look, JP, he's lived in Myrtle Beach, this area, for most of his life. He's not going to run away. He's not a flight risk. He came to court after getting the original summons. He shouldn't have to be monitored. The court clearly wasn't persuaded. He's got to wear an ankle monitor. And one more thing to note about the day's events. After the arraignment, when asked by the media if there would be more charges against Miller, U.S. Attorney Brian Sterling only said that the investigation was ongoing. By the way, Prosecutor Klein said that Micah's family is fully supportive of this investigation, saying we're in constant contact with the victim's family. We're trying to respect them as they're going through this, because while Micah's gone, she's certainly not forgotten, and we want to stand by them through this whole process, and I think they'd be happy with today's result. Now, needless to say, there are a lot of eyeballs on what happens to J.P. Miller in his criminal case. I mean, it was reported that the courtroom for this initial stage of the process was just filled with Micah Miller supporters all dressed in purple. Outside, there were those releasing purple balloons, and you had supporters holding signs. In fact, we're going to bring on Micah's attorney, Regina Ward, in a few minutes, who our understanding she was there during this court appearance. Get her perspective on it. But I have to mention this. What makes this all the more notable, what makes this all the more shocking, is that we're talking about a pastor at former Solid Rock Church in Myrtle Beach who came under a lot of suspicion and a lot of spotlights and a lot of theories after Micah died. Remember, when right after she died, JP delivers this message to his congregation. I mentioned shocking. I think this shocked everyone.
I got a call late last night. My wife has passed away. And it was self-induced, and it was up in North Carolina. Y'all knew that she wasn't well mentally, and that she needed her medicine that was hard to get to her.
This is essentially how he broke the news. And by the way, Micah's body was found in a North Carolina state park, reportedly 2 days after serving J.P. Miller with divorce papers. There was this separation process that was ongoing. And almost immediately after people heard the news that she died, there were rumors that started flying that Miller could have had something to do with Micah's death. To be clear, though, there is no evidence to support that. There is no evidence that he was actually involved in what happened to her. He wasn't even in the area when this happened. The medical examiner confirmed that Micah's fatal gunshot wound was self-inflicted. But there was a lot of accusation that Miller had been abusive to Micah. And by the way, that included from Micah herself. Like, just months before she died, she made this call to 911 claiming her husband had assaulted her.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
Hi, I have somebody who I believe to be in a manic state and is a direct danger to the people in his household and himself and others. I need an immediate pickup, not the 72-hour pickup that a spouse can initiate. I need this to be a little quicker because he is a flight risk. There's been domestic violence. He put his hands on me. He's pushed me down in front of thousands of people at Disney World. And so, yeah, and his best friend even saw that happen. He slapped drinks right out of my hand. I was in the hospital after that from just a panic attack of what was happening.
And Micah also allegedly told police she was being targeted by Miller, that she was afraid, that she alleged he was messing with her car's tires, putting tracking devices on her car, constantly contacting her unsolicited. So arguably mirroring the allegations in the indictment, in the federal indictment. So there are those who've been following this, who have been actively supporting Micah after her death, hoping for some sort of accountability for Miller. Although, to be clear, these are just allegations. He hasn't been found guilty of anything. But this kind of all boiled over, to give you an idea of this all boiled over in a showdown from November 2024, when Miller allegedly got into an alleged altercation with a Micah Miller supporter in a parking lot. This is where he allegedly tapped the bill of her hat. Miller was later arrested, charged with third-degree assault and battery. So all of this is going on, and now you have the conclusion of the first step in the criminal case. Okay, so with all that in mind, let me bring back here on Sidebar Regina Ward. This was Micah Miller's attorney, represented her during her separation proceedings with J.P. Miller. Thank you so much for coming on, Regina. It's really good to see you. Now, first of all, for everybody who knows, you were there yesterday in the courtroom for this arraignment, front row, right? Like, what was it like in that courtroom. What was the atmosphere like?
Yes, I was on the front row. I kept changing seats until I got there. And as far as the courtroom itself, it's very beautiful. It's very ominous. You know you're in a serious place whenever you get there. The courtroom was packed, and I mean packed like sardines packed. They ended up having to close the doors and turn away a couple of people, but every seat was taken, and everybody was there was a lot of sea of purple there too.
So it was mostly Micah Miller supporters, right? Why the purple, by the way? Why that color?
Well, purple is the color that represents domestic violence. It's what's the color that's associated with it, the movement against it.
And was there anybody there that was on J.P. Miller's side? I mean, obviously, besides his attorney, was anybody in the gallery for him, supporting him?
Right. So we did notice when he entered the courthouse, there was no one with him. He wasn't even accompanied by his attorneys. They were there, though. They saw him on the inside, and of course, they walked with him into the courtroom. Obviously, not present was his current wife. She was not there, and we didn't see anybody else that was there to support him in any kind of way.
How did he look? What do I mean by that? I mean, his demeanor, his appearance. This is, one of the initial stages in a federal criminal case. The stakes are quite serious. How did he appear to you?
Yeah, so when he first came in, he came in through the doors that we all came into. We were not sure if he was going to enter from a side door within the courtroom or not, but he came into the regular door and walked right down the aisle into the well of the court with his attorneys. He kept his head down. He didn't make eye contact that I could tell with anybody. He went straight with his attorneys over to defense counsel's table. He had a seat there. There was a Bible directly in front of him. He picked it up and flipped through some pages, went to some passage, I guess. Appeared to be reading. I don't know that I buy that, but I think he was just trying to not look around. And in fact, I was really wanting him to look around. I wanted him to see and feel the strength and the power and the presence of the courtroom that he was sitting in at that time.
Did he say anything during the course of his appearance?
Right. There were a few times that he would have had the opportunity to speak. So, for instance, the first thing would have been the reading of the indictment itself in court. He waived that, so his attorneys, presented that to him. He also had an opportunity, or had his right, to enter whether he was going to plead guilty or not guilty to those charges. He did not speak that. His lawyers had that reduced to writing and submitted that to court prior to. So the only time we got to hear him actually speak was when the court advised him that, pursuant to the federal rules, he's entitled to, actually, according to the Constitution, we're all entitled to a speedy trial. But the federal courts, they run a tight ship there. So they have set a rule that says you have to get your trial within 70 days. And the judge had informed him that they had just pulled the jury for this term of court, and the next term of court will be in March. And obviously that would be beyond the 70 days. And so Mr. Miller had the opportunity to insist on his trial within the 70 days or to waive it. And he chose to waive it. And the court had to ask him specific questions about that waiver, making sure that he had been advised of his rights, that he was doing it freely and voluntarily without, any threat of coercion. So that was the only time we got to hear him speak.
And to be clear, obviously, this happens a number of times, right? Criminal defendants waive the speedy trial. Why do you think he did it here? What's the strategic reason? Does he want to, some would say, hey, listen, put the prosecution's feet to the fire, make them go to trial immediately. I don't think that they have the evidence. Then there's others who say, I'm going to waive it, take my time, look at the defense a little bit, see what the evidence is. Why do you think he waived it?
Well, a couple of reasons, because the judge said that this term of court, the jury was impaneled starting today. And so that just wouldn't be reasonable. Right. But really, the bigger thing is that there is a case that we file a motion that's called a Brady motion or Rule 5. That is the discovery tool. The defense counsel probably has already filed that. That's a demand and a request for the prosecuting authorities to turn over all evidence that they've collected so that his defense counsel can evaluate the case that the government has against their client and advise him accordingly. So obviously, and when they serve that Brady motion, the U.S. Attorney General's office, they have up to 30 days to respond and reply to that. And so that, that's a smart thing to do as a defense attorney, is to get that information, because you really want to see well, do they have a case that can stick,
What about the ankle monitor? I know there was a lot of back and forth about, his defense attorney said he's not a flight risk. He has been a part of this community for most of his life. He's shown up when he's supposed to show up, but the other way of looking at it is authorities revealed what they found in his house, money, private plane. So there's an ankle monitor put on him. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I was sitting on the edge of my seat like everybody else. The judge went through everything meticulously with regard to the bond and the conditions and so forth. And the very last thing he said was he was granted the ankle monitor. And so you could just feel a sigh of relief in that courtroom. Obviously, the judge agreed with the U.S. Attorney General's office that he needed to be tracked, that there was a potential for a threat to society in some degree because he had actively sought the addresses for Micah's family members. He actually sought addresses for potential witnesses in the case. That's some scary stuff. And so the judge is not going to allow him to, just move about without monitoring. And, I've heard some other folks say this, poetic justice, right? Mr. Miller stalked and tracked Micah for months, years, and now he's being tracked by the government. So how's that feel?
By the way, the majority of supporters there, what were their thoughts regarding what happened in court, watching Miller? I mean, why were they there? What were they hoping for? Because there's people who've been following this for a while. They're invested in it. They're looking to see what results from this. And I made it clear, and I'll say it again, he's innocent until proven guilty, right? These are allegations. But the majority of people that were there, maybe people even spoke to, what are they there for? What are they looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things. Number one, of course, is justice for Micah herself. After learning what she was subject to, by Mr. Miller, and senses a person to think that someone can get away with treating someone like that and not be held accountable. The other thing is that it's bringing validation to other people in similar situations. It's also putting a light on the deficiencies that we have in our government with regard to protecting people who are in these domestic violence situations. And remember, this is coercive control type of abuse. The federal government recognizes it, but the state government here in South Carolina doesn't. And we're working on trying to change that. But the supporters that are there, they were not only seeking and demanding justice for what happened to Micah, but also it brings about justice for others who are in similar situations by bringing the light to it and holding someone actually accountable. Most people who are subject to domestic violence feel like that their abuser just gets away with things. And a lot of times they do. They get away with a lot of things. And so it's just reassuring and uplifting to know that finally it's being recognized and the criminal system is dealing with it and making a very good example out of Mr. Miller.
Now, as we mentioned before, he's pled not guilty to the charges. I believe he's being represented by an attorney named Nathan Williams. Do you know anything about Nathan Williams?
I don't know him personally. I haven't had any interaction with him. And I think he's in a different county than I am. Of course, I did look him up, and he seems to have very good credentials. In fact, I said, Mr. Miller did not hire cheap lawyers over there. He's got some, it looks like, very skilled and professional attorneys with a lot of experience with them.
What did you make of the fact, authorities saying they found all of this cash, the silver, the baseball cards in this safe in his home? It was always interesting to know what was found in his home pursuant to that search warrant. What did you make of that?
Yeah, so I wasn't surprised. Of course, Micah had disclosed to me that he did have a safe. She mentioned that he kept multiple guns in there and other things. And then she knew that he had cash in the safe. So again, that finding by the FBI through the search warrant and coming across that safe also corroborated and gave credibility to Micah's essential testimony about what was there. And so I'm truly not surprised at that. And it was nice to hear that everything that we had suspected, actually the FBI had uncovered.
And by the way, for people who don't know, your involvement in this investigation, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't the feds issue you a subpoena for items in your possession? Is there anything you could tell us about that?
Yes, they did issue a subpoena. That was in the summer. And that, of course, I couldn't speak of that. No one knew that even an investigation was going on. At that time, when I received that, there was an opportunity to appear before the grand jury and testify or simply turn over the materials. And of course, as an attorney, we have a duty to protect confidentiality of our clients' information and so forth. And so that by virtue of the subpoena, then I could turn that over, and also had permission with the family as well to turn that over. And so it was all the things that Micah had given me that corroborated the things like the photos of the tracker and all of the police reports and text message threads and her journal entries and things like that. So I saw all of that actually in the indictment. It seemed like it just followed the things that she had provided.
I basically said that before, like all the allegations that Micah was making seemed to mirror the allegations in the indictment and what he's charged with. I want to ask about Micah's family in a minute to see how they're doing through the course of all this, but I have to ask you about something that happened. You hear U.S. Attorney Brian Sterling, after the arraignment, when asked, are there going to be more charges, only said the investigation was ongoing. What does that tell you?
Yeah, well, I felt that it had to be ongoing because in terms of that search warrant, I would not be surprised if there's some sort of financial crimes that may come out of that. I don't have any personal knowledge about that. That's just me surmising and based on some of the things that were told to me by Micah and so forth. So I was happy to hear that it was still an ongoing investigation because I'm quite certain that there's probably more to come. At least I'm hopeful there is anyway.
And we'll keep a careful eye on that to see if anything should result in, new charges, a new indictment. With respect to the charges that he's facing, with respect to the current case, what is it we can expect next? According to WPTW, the prosecutors, they want, quote, all prior statements in Miller's possession, if any, given by witnesses that he expects to call, all books, papers, documents, photographs, tangible objects or portions of any that Miller owns, has custody of, or controls, results of all physical and mental examinations undergone by Miller, criminal records of any potential witnesses. Miller's attorney wants the same with respect to the prosecution's witnesses, very standard during the course of discovery and the criminal process. They want to know how they're going to be able to maybe impeach the witnesses that are called by both sides. Pretty standard, but I believe his next hearing is in March, right? So what can we expect regarding next stages of the criminal case for John Paul Miller?
Yeah, so what will be happening right now is that exchanging of reciprocal discovery and evidence in the possession of each side. Whenever his attorneys receive the information from the U.S. Attorney General's office, they most likely will file some motions to either challenge some of that evidence, be it, file motions to keep it out of court or challenge the way it was obtained and things like that. So that's a maneuver that's used in defense counsel to weaken the government's case against their client. So there'll be the discovery phase, and then the judge had mentioned that the next term of court is in March. So there's a possibility that Mr. Miller can go to court or go to trial in March. Now, he can ask for a continuance to move to the next term of court, which would be probably sometime in the summer. But right now, as it stands, it appears that the next opportunity for him to go to trial will be with the next term of court in March.
Let's go back to Micah's family. What can you tell us right now, if you can, about how they're doing? This, I have to imagine, is a lot of different emotions right now. How are they doing through this part of the criminal process, this next stage? There's obviously were big developments this week. Can you tell us how they're doing?
Yes, absolutely. Of course, they have basically trust in the system to work. It seems, it works a little slow, but it seems to be working so far. Some people have asked, were they in the courtroom? And they were not in the courtroom at the arraignment. It was not necessary for them to be in the courtroom. I think that it was the correct action for them to take because there was a lot of press. And I feel like that they would have been probably barraged with a lot of questions. It's highly emotional time for them regardless, okay? We haven't gotten to the finish line yet. That's the thing that matters the most. We're making the steps to get there, but haven't got there yet. And the family also has a victim's advocate that also represents and speaks on their behalf in court as well. But they're leaning on each other and staying strong and hopeful.
Well, listen, Regina Ward, I always appreciate you coming on, being so generous with your time and giving updates on what is happening on the ground there. You're our eyes and our ears. Really appreciate it. Thank you as always. And we look forward to continuing the conversation as J.P. Miller's criminal case progresses. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you. Appreciate you keeping the interest and an eye on this case. It's important to a lot of people. Thank you so much.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.